Tower, the former site of the two World Trade Center towers. This 20 years to the day, September 11th, 2021, after the most notorious terror attack on our nation's soil. A solemn day, but also a day that we mark as a remembrance of the heroes that stood up that day, who saved so many, who showed us our national character. I'm Will Kane, along with Pete Hegseth and Rachel Campos Duffy. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
You were listening, by the way, to the New Jersey State Band play Amazing Grace.
Yes, and as we're getting ready this morning, we're looking down at the NYPD here right over our shoulder, mustering this morning. They'll be doing two things: providing security for the entire set of events that are happening today, all of which we'll cover. There you can see right there on your screen. But many of them lost brothers on that day as well, from the FDNY or the NYPD. And Amazing Grace is a fitting way to open up the show. It is a solemn day, but we also remember the heroism of so many on September 11th, 20 years ago.
Absolutely. So many of us want to remember that heroism. You need to remember what happened, but really think so much about the good that came as well on that horrible, horrible day. I've never been to this memorial site before, this area of the city before, so for me it's really special to do it on this day of all days.
For sure.
Meanwhile, President Biden and the First Lady, they're here in New York City as well. They arrived last night and will attend the 9/11 ceremonies today.
Ahead of their arrival, the White House released a pre-recorded address from the president paying tribute to the lives that were lost.
Ashley Strohmeyer joins us now with Joe Biden's message. Ashley.
In that recorded 9/11 message to America, the president spoke directly to the families who lost loved ones in the attacks.
America and the world commemorate you and your loved ones, the pieces of your soul. We honor all those who risked and gave their lives in the minutes, hours, months, and years afterwards.
The president went on recalling the national unity in the days and weeks following the attacks.
Unity is what makes us who we are. America at its best. To me, that's the central lesson of September 11th.
The president will attend memorials at all three attack sites today in New York City, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and the Pentagon. Meanwhile, officials are reassuring Americans in New York and across the country they will be safe.
To the homeland arising from any terrorist organization or terrorist individual.
I absolutely guarantee the safety of the city tomorrow. Come out and enjoy New York.
New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio promised massive resources will be deployed to protect New Yorkers and visitors. And the governor warned people they will see an increase of heavily armed officers around mass transit hubs today. Back to you guys.
All right, thank you so much, Ashley.
Thank you so much, Ashley.
You know, there's so many ways you can reflect on a day like this, and the last thing you want to do is get political, and I think we're going to do right by this show today, but at the same time it brings up questions of where you are. Where were you? You know, could we react the way we reacted then as a nation, specifically around the idea of unity and the way the nation came together after those attacks in what was not a superficial way, at least for those first few weeks and months when people rallied around the flag and said, this is our country, we will defend it, we need something to, we need to come together. But you automatically sit where you are now and look back and say, could we do that today?
Yeah, and not just united as a country, but, red and blue. I mean, I was in rural Wisconsin when this happened, but we all felt like New Yorkers that day. Yeah. And the divide in America between red and blue America, rural and urban America, is so stark. And it was interesting because Rob O'Neill, the man who ended up taking out Osama bin Laden, somebody that many of us who've gotten to meet him feel really honored to actually know him, said that despite the events of the last few weeks and the kind of thought that terrorism might be on the rise again, and we've had White House officials actually saying that, generals saying that, that's not what worries Rob O'Neill. He says the biggest concern is this division that you're talking about, Pete. He said, my biggest concern is the division in this country. Most people are good to each other. There were people running out of the towers to live, and there were policemen and firemen running up to die. When the demons come, someone's going to be there to defend you, and America should realize that.
We should realize that. And I don't think it's inappropriate, Pete, to put the context of today into the surroundings of our present moment, the politics, the culture, the climate of our present moment, where Americans turn on each other, urban versus rural, red versus blue, black versus white, vaccinated versus unvaccinated. We treat each other as our greatest enemies, when reality is we should be one. We should be a people that can come together, certainly to thwart attacks and threats from the outside, but to also accomplish great goals. And it is after September 11th. It was in those moments that so many realized who we are as a people. Joseph Esposito, he was a 9/11 first responder, and General Richard Myers, who was the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time, talked about that feeling that Pete described in the moments after this terrible attack. They laid it out on Ingram. Watch.
Right after it happened, I mean, there was a feeling in America that I never thought I would experience. Everybody was kind to everybody. They were cheering for the uniformed forces. Everybody was helping everybody. And it's just a shame we needed a disaster for that to happen. It should be like that every day.
I also think about how unified this country was right after 9/11. Driving around Washington, D.C. and seeing cars with American flags streaming out of them all over the city by everybody. Of course, 20 years, a lot has changed for a lot of reasons, but I kind of long for that solidarity that 9/11 brought to the United States of America.
Boy, don't we all.
Yeah, I was just going to say that there was also a spiritual revival. When this happened, I think a lot of people went back to the church. There were so many stories of people, not just on that day, trying to find refuge in churches around the city, but literally going back to God, returning back to God, and so many pastors and priests seeing their churches filled in the months following. And I think that has a lot to do with that unity too. And I think we've become not just more disunified since then as a country, we've also become, I think, much more secular. And I think the polls bear that out as well.
Well, it's the old adage, there are no atheists in foxholes.
That's right.
And everyone was in a foxhole in that moment.
That's so true.
But, you think back to September 11, 2001, just a year earlier, months earlier, they had the contention over the Florida recount of who was the legitimate president of the United States. There were plenty of political differences in 2001. There were Republicans and Democrats, there were partisan swipes. What feels different about 20 years later is that division feels deeper. It feels like we're debating the essence of whether America's a good country at all, whether the flag should be flown at all.
Right.
And that's the scarier part for us in our conversation, and Will, you alluded to it, is could we muster as the home team, if necessary, with something like this, or is the Blame America view so predominant in what we teach our kids and what we reinforce in our media that we could or could not do that?
Well, the only way to answer that question, unfortunately, is in the moment of necessity. Comfort and wealth, these are actually conditions that lead often for the worst to come out in people, because you can indulge every single whim that enters your brain. You can indulge every single little hobgoblin that's ever plagued your insecurity. But fear and necessity and who you are in the moment, that's revealed on days like September 11th, 2001. And we saw it as a nation. We saw who we are, who people can be. We saw it, honestly, in the heroes of that day. We saw the best in us. And this is what the New York Post editorial board had to say. They said, heroes beget heroes. And not just among their own children, those who stood up on 9/11 remind Americans who we are. Resilient, defiant in the face of terror, united in our patriotism. This is the American spirit, the human spirit. Every 9/11 anniversary is a day of tremendous sadness, but also one of awe and gratitude for so many firefighters, police, and civilians who face down horror and fear to serve us all. Never forget.
Never forget.
It's a great quote, but again, it brings up some of the stark differences between then and now. I think even respect for law enforcement and for firefighters, especially for our police officers, has really declined in America since then. And also, I think as much as we want to focus on the heroism of that day today, I do believe that the events of the last 2 weeks have made this anniversary more painful than it maybe had to be. And I just don't think we can deny that.
You can't deny that. How could it not for people looking at what's unfolded in Afghanistan, the political nature, the manner in which it was ended, that does add an additional imprint on people today. There's no doubt about it.
No question.
But you could hold both things at the same time.
True.
And the second in saying, hey, those 343 firefighters who ran up the stairs while the building was on fire, they all had wives. They all had children. They all had futures. And they chose to run up the stairs for people they'd never met, for an instance that was absolute chaos. Knowing, who knew that those buildings could collapse, but it didn't matter. They were putting it. The whole thing, when you step back and think about it on an individual level, is jarring, the courage of those first.
It really does. And one of the heroes who lost his life on 9/11 was FDN firefighter Stephen Siller.
When Stephen heard the news of the plane hitting the North Tower, he quickly responded, strapping his gear on his back and racing on foot through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel.
Amazing story. 20 years later, his brother Frank is honoring his memory with the Tunnel to Towers Foundation and by finishing his Never Forget Walk, which kicked off right here on Fox and Friends about a month ago.
I think it's so important that we never forget what happened 20 years ago, and so I'm walking from the three places that had such unbelievable loss of life. I got unbelievable things from my family that I'm wearing that with pictures of my brother that right here on my heart as I'm walking. So I can't fail them. I will complete this. You can bank on it.
That picture right on his heart. Let's check in with Frank along with Fox and Friends Enterprise reporter Lawrence Jones. Lawrence.
Hey, good morning, family. It is a somber mood out here today. Frank has been walking for over 500 miles across the country, taking that path. And now we're here at the spot where it all started for your brother, Frank. Tell me about the emotion that you're feeling right now.
Well, it is very difficult to be here thinking what my brother did 20 years ago. His car came to a screeching halt a couple hundred yards away from the mouth of the tunnel, which we're right at, and eyewitness said that he hopped out of that car, put his gear on, and started running right into that tunnel. And police officer told me afterwards that when he moved the car, my brother had business cards in his car. It says Siller and Sons, and his sons were only 2.5 and 9 months old at that time. And that's my brother was all about his family, and I can't imagine what was going through his mind as he ran into that tunnel and didn't know what was going to be when he came out the other side. And this whole journey that I've been on for the 537 miles, it's definitely to honor him. It has been very personal for me this year to do it, and I just want to make sure America never forgets what happened 20 years ago. And I think a lot of people eyes are wide open, especially with the events that just happened in Afghanistan.
Frank, you've been on this journey over 500 miles, and you've had the opportunity to reflect about what happened that day and how it changed the country forever. What do you think about the young people today that aren't aware of the ultimate sacrifice that a lot of people like your brother paid the ultimate sacrifice?
Yeah, I say that once again on this walk, I have seen many young families out with their kids. We've had 8 different parades in 8 different towns, and so many times they just line the street and they're out there with the young kids, and it gives me some encouragement that parents are telling their children what happened 20 years ago. I dressed 8th graders yesterday in Blessed Sacrament, 7th and 8th graders, and I said, you guys are old enough to know the truth, that Islamic terrorists try to kill as many Americans as possible. They did kill 2,977 of them, and many of them right at the North and South Tower here when I come through the tunnel on the other side. But look, you know what I'm doing today? I'm calling the widow of McCullum, Lance Corporal McCullum. I'm calling her today to speak to her. And because I want to tell her that the Tunnel to Towers Foundation is going to deliver her a mortgage-free home, because it's so important that we, all of us as Americans, but most certainly Tunnel to Towers Foundation and my family, do something positive, because we want to make sure that goodness always crushes and beats evil. And that's why I'm going to call her and speak to her and let her know that she's going to always be part of the Siller family
Frank, we're praying for you today. We know this is an emotional time for you and your family. Thank you for what you do for the country, for all the people that have lost from Fox News and Fox and Friends. We thank you so much. Guys, I'm going to send it back to you guys. This is actually the first time that I have been to Ground Zero. I have lived in New York for 2 years, commuted back and forth for 5 years. This happened when I was in the 2nd grade, and I've always avoided Ground Zero because of the motion there. It was that day that my dad became a big fan of President Bush when he said, the people, I hear you, the world hears you, and pretty soon they will hear from all of us. That was the moment that we became unified as a country and unified as a family, guys. I'm going to send it back to you guys.
It was a powerful moment.
All right, Lawrence, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you, Frank.
Thanks,
We will
Lawrence.
check back in with Frank as he goes through the tunnel this morning, completing that journey. You can feel the emotion. And Rachel, to the point you made, the donation that he just announced was for one of the Marines, I believe, that was killed in Afghanistan.
Yes.
You can't deny the connection to
No.
the mission that we had there and what happened in the last few weeks and how it is tethered to the hearts of someone like Frank Siller and these families and others who know the truth of who attacked us. Islamist terrorists attacked us on 9/11. You can try to have a revisionist history and pretend that that's not the case. It's a long thread that leads from Afghanistan all the way to here.
You're so right, and I think we have Frank on a lot. He's such an amazing person. By the way, he looks amazing. We should all go on that walk. He looks the fittest I've ever seen him. He looks really healthy, but he doesn't just raise money. He's raising awareness because whether we like it or not, there is a segment of our population that doesn't want the story told. They think that it's insensitive. They want to make sure that there's no blame attached to what happened there. That is absolutely happening, and there is a generation of Americans who are growing up, going through school, never getting a history lesson on 9/11. So Frank is encouraged by the families that have come out while he's been walking, and that's very encouraging. But believe me, if you're not telling your kids about 9/11, we're finding out if they're learning in school. You might be surprised. I, as a parent, was surprised that 9/11 sometimes is not taught on 9/11 in the children's school, and we cannot forget what happened. We just can't.
Just to bring this segment full circle, what a not just beautiful gesture by Frank Siller, but what a wonderful illustration for everyone watching at home to think about Stephen Siller. Talk about that heroism.
Yeah.
To think about Stephen Siller's car coming to a screeching halt right outside the Brooklyn Tunnel and strapping on his gear and running through that tunnel and emerging on the other side to where we're sitting this morning, to destruction, to chaos. And right in the midst of all of that, one example among hundreds, thousands most likely, of heroism of climbing into that chaos. What one wonderful illustration, which we'll be keeping up with all throughout the morning.
Best of America, absolutely.
It is.
Well, we are paying tribute all morning long to the nearly 3,000 people killed in the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Our next guests both lost loved ones that day, and they'll join us to reflect.
This morning, we're honoring nearly 3,000 people who lost their lives on September 11th. Tom Strada was a devoted husband and father who was working on the 104th floor of the North Tower when the planes hit. Dorothy Morgan was on the 94th floor of that same building working at an insurance company. She had spoken to her daughter Nakia on the phone earlier that morning. 2 decades later, Dorothy became the 1,646th victim identified by DNA just this week. Dorothy's daughter Nakia and Tom Strada's wife Terry join us now. Ladies, thank you so much for being with me
Thank you.
this morning. Nakia,
Yes.
this week your mother was identified by DNA.
Yes.
Tell me what that feels like. Just on Tuesday, you got the news that she was formally identified. Does that provide you what type of emotion and resolve?
It was reliving it all over again. It was very shocking. It just brought me back to 20 years ago.
And what did it bring back? Your mother, we just said, worked on the 94th floor, and you
Yes.
spoke to her on the phone that morning. Tell me about your mom, and please tell me about that phone call.
Oh, that phone call, I called her every morning while she was at work. And that morning we were speaking about my son's school supplies list. My son was 4 at the time, starting pre-K. And so it was maybe 10 minutes before. And since I'm glad I had that phone call before. I got to tell her that I loved her. So I'm very happy about that.
we're just sitting here on set, and Terry and Nakia held hands a moment before we went on television. I said, did you know each other? No, you just met, but Terry, you said you're family. And you share that in common, not just awfully what happened on that day, but you shared a phone call as well that morning before the event. You spoke to your husband, Tom, that morning.
I did, yes. Right after the plane had hit, he called to tell me that a plane had hit the building. I was standing in front of the television set, so I didn't see, it wasn't on TV yet, so I didn't know how actually horrible it was. But it was a very frantic phone call, a lot of panic in his voice, and I could hear a lot of screaming in the background and commotion. And he said he was going to the stairwell, but as I found out later, the stairwells were gone from the airplane, from the impact. And then it came on the television set within a minute after hanging up the telephone, and I saw that black billowing smoke and the fire. He was on the 104th floor, so I knew how horrific it really was. So that phone call is both a blessing and a curse, because I heard from him the last time that he was trapped and scared.
I've asked you both about what you felt that morning, the phone calls you've had that morning, but how does it feel here today, 20 years later, to the day, sitting here where we are above Ground Zero? How do you feel sitting here today, Terry?
Well, I also lived here for 6 years, right across from the North Tower. Tom and I spent our first 6 years together in Manhattan while he was working on Wall Street before we moved to New Jersey. So it's coming home a little bit for me. So there's a lot of mixed emotions because a lot of happiness was spent here, and then all of that horribleness happened here too. But I find comfort in the reflecting pools. I think the way that they did it is beautiful, a beautiful tribute to everyone that is gone, and I'm glad that they preserve the footprints of the towers. But it's a lot of mixed emotions.
Nakia?
Well, this is my first time coming out here in the 20 years, and speaking with Terry earlier, she gave me some comfort in what I'll be seeing. So I'm excited to see the reflecting pool and to see my mom's name, and I'll be reading names today. So I feel good about it today. I didn't know how I was going to feel, but so far I'm doing okay.
What would you like people to know and remember about your mother?
Oh, how wonderful she was. Amazing, beautiful, caring, just loving, just a comforter.
And Terry, not only do I know you've carried the fight for justice for what happened that day on for the 20 years since that day, I also understand your son, your and Tom's son, is serving in the United States military. He's in the Army.
Yes, my youngest, he was 4 days old on the 11th, and at 19 he graduated from Fort Benning as a private in the U.S. Army. I'm very proud of him. He's gone back to school at the University of Kentucky. He's in ROTC and wants to have a career with the military. He wants to serve his country.
Well, Terry and Nakia, I'm so sorry for your loss, but I appreciate you being here with us this morning, sharing these stories with us, and just want to say I thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
All right, for many, the devastating attacks were a call to serve, as you just heard. Terry's son heard that call.
The terror attacks on September 11th were a call to service for many of us in the military. Medal of Honor recipient and Fox News contributor Dakota Meyer was just 13 years old when the towers collapsed. He joined the Marine Corps 5 years later and deployed to Afghanistan. Dakota joins us now to reflect on what this day means for service members, veterans across the country. Dakota, thanks so much for being here. You were 13.
Thank you.
The attacks of 9/11, were they a motivator for you? How much did you reflect on them when you put the Marine Corps uniform on?
I can't say that I joined. I was 13 years old. I can remember sitting in my art class at 13 years old. I remember bringing in the TV. It was a TV that they used to have on the stands. It was a double. The stand was black and it had like the strap coming over the top of it. And I'll never forget they brought it in. I watched the second tower fall. And can I say I joined to go and because of 9/11? No, but I think without 9/11, I don't have that instinct in my heart to go serve. Look, none of us forgot about it. It's our generation's Pearl Harbor. It was such a significant day and moment for every single one of us as Americans who were alive that day.
And your actions, the actions of so many in Afghanistan were extraordinary. Yours above and beyond as a recipient of the Medal of Honor in 2009. When you look at today's date and you look at what happened in the last couple of weeks, are you able to reflect and appreciate, or are you of two minds right now, thinking about how we left Afghanistan on this 20-year anniversary?
Look, I don't think we can get wrapped up around that. I think we have an obligation as Americans, as veterans who went over and served, as people who understand the pain of what this day represents. I think we have an obligation to go out and remind people of the sacrifices that have been made on behalf of this country to stay free, on behalf and what it takes to protect and to serve and to keep this country safe. I think that's what we have to do. We have to go out. Look, 9/11 is by far the worst day in modern history in the United States on Earth's soil. But 9/12 was a day that showed the world, our allies, it showed strength. It showed how united the United States of America is. People came together. All these subcategories that this great country allows us to be and to identify as and to go out and live as. We all came together as one, as Americans. We came together as the core of us, and we represented that across the globe. And look, the strength of the United States is something that is unchallengeable.
To that point of the strength of America being unchallengeable, and you mentioned 9/12, do you think, I can't help but reflect these 20 years later, are we creating the next generation of Dakota Myers who look proudly at the flag, who understand the nature of the dangerous world we live in and are willing to put a uniform on and go do the dirty work of our country? Are you confident that we can carry forward that ethos of really fighting to defend freedom?
I absolutely am, and I'm going to tell you why. Because I don't let politicians, I don't let school representatives, I don't let anyone else and I don't rely on them to instill patriotism and doing what's right in my own children. So I can tell you that me as a father, I am instilling that in my daughters. My daughters look up to people in uniform. My daughters' heroes aren't baseball players, basketball players. They are the men and women who go out, first responders, people who wear the nation's cloth, our service members, our veterans. So I'm instilling that in them. So with your question, to wrap that up, I absolutely think we have the opportunity to do that. But we have to do this as individuals and stop looking to other people around us to do that. We have to instill in our next generation what this means. Because our generation, my kids, hopefully my kids never see a war. Hopefully my kids never see attacks like 9/11 on the United States soil. I have to be able to represent that and remind them and show them what these things are without them having to see it firsthand, hopefully. And that is what we have the opportunity to do. So yes, everyone watching this today, everyone going out and hashtagging never forget, like it's not a hashtag. It's a way of life. Living and standing up for what's right is not easy. It's a way of life, and it is what will decide what our future of the United States of America is.
So well said. What we honor, what we hold up is a reflection of what we value, and ultimately that is on parents to pass it to that next generation. Dakota, thank you so much for everything you've done in the 20 years since and for helping us remember today on 9/11. We appreciate it. Thank you. All right, still ahead.
Years ago, at this hour, thousands of Americans were getting up and getting ready and heading out to Lower Manhattan for a normal day of work at the World Trade Center. But the survivors and witnesses of the tragic events that unfolded will forever remember the images that they saw that day. Photographer Phil Penman, who was on the scene, he joins us with Leslie Haskin, who was in her office on the 36th floor of the North Tower when the plane hit. I'm going to start with you, Phil. You're a photographer. You were doing what you do. You heard what was happening. You ran down to the scene. You started taking photographs. I mean, the first question I had is, did you know that you were in danger by getting so close?
Morning. To be honest, you're pretty much very unaware that you become like you're taken to another place. And you kind of, there's that moment where you're photographing people and you really don't know if you can go through with it because you're seeing people at their weakest hour. But it was, you know, when it was all going down, it was very surreal. You know, I was looking up at the building, photographing the flames coming out, and all of a sudden the building just, you hear this rumble and it's coming down, and you're looking for the viewfinder, and you're just seeing the shards of the building getting closer and closer, and you're totally, you know, you're completely unaware until you see that it's coming closer and closer to you. I was about a city block, and for me, like, firemen ran past me and they were just like, run, run, run. And I ran into a music store that was right behind me.
And it was there that you ended up it was there that you ended up meeting someone, correct? That was you had this close relationship with that person since then. Tell us about that.
Yeah. A lot of the people that I photographed that day, like I've since reached out to. There's a friend of mine, Joanne Capistro, who I photographed on that day, and we reunited after connecting through the 9/11 Museum. And I actually photographed her wedding about 17 years later, which was nice. And then I was with her at the weekend. And there's a lot of the people that I photographed that day I've since met with, or I've stayed over at their house. Had dinner with them. It's been, if I was to say anything nice that came out of this, it was the connection that I made with the people that I photographed that day.
Absolutely amazing. You were with her probably definitely on her worst day and on her best day. Leslie, you were on the 36th floor in that north tower. You lost 22 friends that day. You suffered through very severe PTSD. Tell us about that day, and also I think so many people think it happened and don't really understand how long people carry that trauma with them.
Yeah, you're right. I think from the moment the plane hit the building, we knew that it was only a matter of time, because we heard the explosion, we felt the impact of it, and the building shook so violently and never really righted itself. Imagine going through a building in the stairs that were narrow and filled with smoke, and seeing people and hearing people screaming and being burned alive. And where we came out of the building was where most of the jumpers were. So it's been 20 years of remembering that and hearing those sounds again. I'll never forget the sound of that building coming down. I'll never forget the sounds of people screaming and looking for help, and those brave firemen who risked their lives and really gave their lives to go up those stairs to help some of my friends.
Yeah, it's just, as you describe it, I just can't even imagine. You say that what got you out of this was God. Tell us.
Absolutely. It was after 9/11, and my son talked to me about something that he'd heard in school. He went to a Christian school at the time, and he was talking to me about a scripture that he learned in school. And for some reason, it resonated with me. And I just went to the Lord that night and just prayed. And I said, I don't love you because I don't know you. But if you really are the God that my mother said you were, if you really are the God that my father preached about, then I'm going to need you to be bigger than this event for me. And I went on a journey then of discovering who God is, and then learning again who I am and the strength that God gives us, each of us, in the human spirit to really be able to overcome.
Wow, what a message. He is bigger than the evil of that event and what happened that day and those people who caused that. Leslie, Phil, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Powerful.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.